So, what's happened on this issue? Something very interesting. When Waxman-Markey passed on June 26th, it had, you know, there was a lot of hubbub about it, and a lot of the congressmen went back and caught some grief. And how many, I know a bunch of you, in the morning when you go online, look at the Rasmussen Presidential Tracking Index. Come on, raise your hand if you do it. I know you do. Good, very, very good. That is a 3-day moving average. And so it was not until June 29th that the Rasmussen Index would have 3 full days of Waxman-Markey going around people's heads, cap and trade. And on June 29th, the President's Approval Index, that's the positive, strongly approved minus strongly disapproved, went negative. And it has never been positive for 1 day since then. Prior to June 29th, it was only negative for 2 days in his entire administration. So, you see this thing first in the morning. What do you think Lindsey Graham staffer, what do you think he does? He probably gets it before, looks at it before he gets up to pee. Okay? And he's got to call Graham, who might have been in the place with him, I don't know, and say, I'm tolerant. Trust me, and ask Ed Crane about this. Anyway, he said, hey, Lindsey, the president's approval rating just went negative because of cap and trade. Why don't you talk like you're going to do something about it, but really don't? And of course, the Senate was only all too happy to do this, and that's why they talked a good line about doing cap and trade, but just never ever managed to get around to it until they had to go back home and stand for election. So we have the President issues executive orders. He can tell the Environmental Protection Agency what it should do. The Environmental Protection Agency has been told by the Supreme Court that if it calls carbon dioxide a pollutant, meaning it harms human health and welfare, that it must therefore regulate it to the point that it does not. And if you want to stop this, you and I have to vote in 291 members of the House that will vote to stop it, and 67 senators, because it will most certainly face a presidential veto. So, what did the EPA use to determine that carbon dioxide endangered human health and welfare? Well, they went to a document produced by something called the United States Global Change Research Program. That's about $3 billion a year of all the government grants on global warming that you can find in one book. And needless to say, this is the report they used. It says, Global Climate Change Impacts in the United States, U.S. Global Change Research Program. This is the report that they use, and it might surprise you, but this report is kind of biased. It's missing a lot of science. In fact, I have a brand new Cato project, and I'll tell you what, if you want to farm some of this project out to the Independence Institute so that then they can pass it through to me, because I can't solicit money for Cato here, obviously, what I'm doing is I have a team of 6 scientists from around the country, and we are producing a document that looks exactly like this. Literally, paragraph for paragraph. The subject headings are the same. The illustrations are analogous to what the illustrations are in this thing, and it's all the science they left out. This project will take about 1.5 years, but it's going to be the reference standard, because this is going to get litigated until the cows are illegal, okay? Now, what's going on here? How can I stand up here and say things like science is biased? Well, I could just leave and say read the book, but I would point out something here. Public science. Science is a publicly funded enterprise, is public choice, okay? Because it is publicly funded. It used to be that the industry funded a lot of science, and then they decided that they didn't want to do that anymore because the government would do it for them. And guess what? They got what they didn't pay for. So, I'll give you an example of this. This is a striking one. This building is the head of the American Association for the Advancement of Science building on New York Avenue in Washington, D.C. It's just a couple blocks from Cato, I offer you the fact that this, which is my lobby, it's the lobby for scientists, it's there, to go to Congress and say global warming is going to kill us all, give these guys all this money so that they can study it and tell us how bad it's going to be and what to do about it. and stem cells are going to save everybody, and we'll publish a paper that's a fraud that people will pick up online in 15 minutes, but why should we give it a hard review? Anyway, on the side of this building, just to show you how politically neutral they are, coming up the 12th Street side, there was a banner 3 years ago. I did not take a picture of the banner, so I had to go online to find the closest thing that I could find to it. I am not making this up. Okay? Now, here is a banner in praise of the first nation in history to burn up its food supply to please a political mob. Actually, this is a moral outrage. We burned up 42% of our corn crop this time around. We are the world's largest supplier of corn. Why do you think it's $9 a bushel? Or whatever it is. Oh, you can afford $9 a bushel corn and $5 a box cornflakes. There are a lot of people who can't. And that is what our policy is doing. Anyway, but how did all this start? Well, there's a little history behind this. Okay, every libertarian knows this paragraph in Eisenhower's farewell address about the military-industrial complex. And the councils of government is guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. How predictive was this? 4 years later, an elite headed by Robert McNamara had us mired in Vietnam, but he had a regression model in his computer that showed that they were all going to be dead by 1967. Yeah, science sometimes makes errors, you know. Anyway, the next paragraph, 2 paragraphs, are rarely if ever quoted, but they are. First of all, the Free University, historically the fountainhead of free ideas and scientific discovery, has experienced a revolution in the conduct of research. This is 1961. Partly because of the huge cost involved, a government contract becomes virtually a substitute for intellectual curiosity. Yet, in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific technological elite. The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Hence, this book. That's the prediction that says this book was going to happen. So, do my colleagues actually behave in this way? Well, first of all, got a little more history on this. Eisenhower was responding to what happened 2 presidents before him when Franklin Roosevelt, who never saw a big government thing that he didn't like, realized that the Manhattan Project was an explosive success. And so he wrote to Vannevar Bush, who was the head of the agency that oversaw the Manhattan Project, and said, Dr. Bush, I'll paraphrase, I'm not going to read it. Dr. Bush, this project was great. We took all these scientists and we got them working for the government. And we got them working together. Is there any way after the war that we might be able to continue to do this and have all these scientists working for the greater good after having defeated the enemy in World War II? And Vannevar Bush said, sure. I got this idea, Mr. President. Unfortunately, Mr. President died between when he wrote and when he got an answer. So I went to President Truman and said, I got this idea, Mr. President Truman. We're going to establish a National Science Foundation. And we're going to establish a Defense Science Foundation and a National Institute of Health. And all these people that were working together in World War II will continue to work together, except that we will disperse the money to the federal agencies, some of which we will have to create, and to the universities, and so that we'll have control over the universities too. Is this a great thing or what? So anyway, that gave rise to this. Now, a free beer for the first person who can tell me what this image is from. That's right. This is the State Science Institute from Atlas Shrugged. And you can basically say that what Vannevar Bush gave rise to and what President Eisenhower feared was the State Science Institute. So, at the State Science Institute, they are all virtuous, as you know. And the State Science Institute has a team of climatologists who call themselves the climate scientists. And they wrote in the Supreme Court, an amicus brief in the Supreme Court case Mass v. EPA, which was the one in which I mentioned earlier where the court said, you know, if you got to decide if this is a pollutant, if you do, you have to regulate it, blah, blah, blah. And the climate scientists said, we are unbiased and lily white and pure. That's what this says. Outcomes may turn out better than our best current prediction, but it is just as possible that environmental and health damages will be more severe than the best predictions. What that's saying is we are not biased. And every new piece of information that we find, every new model that has new input, has an equal probability of saying it's either going to be warmer than we thought it was going to be, or it's not going to be as warm as we thought it was going to be. Or that the health effects are going to be worse than we thought they were going to be for the same temperature change, or not as bad. You know, my colleagues at the State Science Institute are wonderful because they function so well in a data-free environment. And they make statements. They make statements that aren't statements. They're testable hypotheses. Okay? So I decided to test the virtue of the State Science Institute. And I went to Nature magazine and Science, the two, quote, greatest publications in the world on science. And I looked at 13 months of Science and Nature and every global warming article they had, and I threw them into one of three piles. Oh, it's worse than we thought. Ah, frankly, it's not as bad as we thought. I can't tell from looking at this one. So we got three different piles. And I gave the piles to my friends, and they put them in pretty much the same order. So I figured I was doing okay on this. And here's the result. There were 115 articles. 23 I couldn't tell or were neutral. 9 were not as bad as we thought. And 83 were worse than we thought. Now, because the colleagues, these climate scientists at the State Science Institute tell us that they are really an unbiased penny. You see, it's either worth that there should be equal probability of this. We can test, in fact, the chance that they really are unbiased, okay? All we have to do is flip a coin 92 times and see how many times we have to run that operation in order to get 9 or fewer heads or tails out of the 92 flips. This is what we have computers for, okay? And in case you're wondering, you know how many times you have to flip a coin 92 times to have a 50% chance of getting 9 or fewer heads or tails? It's the number at the bottom of the slide. Okay? So, my dear colleagues are really kind of BSing you when they say that they're not biased. And they really, really don't like this argument. My friends in Washington try to explain why people dislike me so much because I think I'm rather charming. As a they say, well, it's because your scientific colleagues are being accused of having public choice biases, and they really, really don't like that. I suspect that those people are right. Anyway, at the State Science Institute, we also have practice something. Science without numbers is like something without something. I could really be gross if I thought about that. Modeling is to reality as romance is to sex. So here it is. This is a paper in Nature magazine, February 17th. I dug this one out, right? Anybody here go to the Students for Liberty thing in Washington, D.C. or hear about it? Anyway, it's a really big deal. I gave a talk there. This just happened to come out right before that. Human contribution to more intense precipitation extremes. That's a rhetorically loaded title. Our results show that global climate models we use may have underestimated the observed trend, which implies that extreme precipitation events may strengthen even more quickly in the future than projected, and that they may have more severe impacts than estimated. You know, is there anything in this abstract that says how much? No, this is not science, it's mathematical philosophy, okay? That's the difference between the two. And the authors actually could have looked at a paper published about 10 years before by a guy by the name of Michaels and Knappenberger, two guys, where we looked at the change in precipitation on the day of the year that it rains the most. That's extreme precipitation. And, you know, and then we looked at that for stations all around the United States. We had a whole bunch of stations. And we discovered that indeed intense rainfall is going up.